Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session, Changing the Training Routine, Adapting to COVID. I'm Cheryl Seminar. I am going to be your moderator for this panel, and I'm really excited about the three panelists we have today. I actually know each of them personally, so before I begin introducing you, thank you so much for taking time to joining us today. First, we have Ann Alston. Ann is the CEO of Alston Tech. We have Gary Powell, who is the training officer for FIMA, which is part of FEMA. We love acronyms in the government. And then we have Dave Zander, who is the Associate Director of Assessments and Measurements over at the Veterans Administration. So panelists, thank you so much. I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. So Ann, let's start with you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Cheryl, for inviting me here today. And it is a pleasure to be here with Gary and Dave in this panel. So we're very excited about that. My name is Ann Alston, and I'm the CEO of Alston Tech, which is a small business company here in Maryland that focuses on very small businesses, helping them understand how to legalize and do things the right way. Specifically also focusing on minority-owned businesses to make sure that they are very successful, sustainable, and have longevity. I have been doing this type of work since 1997, going all the way back, doing desktop support work, and also desktop publishing and general consulting. And so it's just been a very rewarding career thus far. I have been able to help many businesses and many new startups get their first start. And I'm just really happy about all the stuff that I'm doing.
Thanks, Ann. Gary, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Cheryl. So good morning, and well, it could be good afternoon. And it is also a pleasure to be a panelist with our two other esteemed colleagues. So I am currently serving as the training officer for the Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration, which is a part of FEMA. And my role is essentially to provide learning and development expertise, so to be the learning and development expert across my organization and try to initiate programs that will enable us to bring about a productive learning culture. So what does that mean? So more specifically, for example, a few years ago, well, last year, I started FIMA's very first mentoring program, started an enterprise-wide cross-cutting training program for all staff called the FIMA Learning Journey. So basically, I see myself as responsible for the proper care and feeding of our workforce. The only way to become a world-class workforce is to keep your skills sharp and to constantly build capability. And so that's what I do.
Thanks, Gary. And David. David, we can't hear you.
Greetings, this is Dave Zander. I am the Associate Director for Measurement and Evaluation at the VHA's Employee Education System. VHA, Veterans Health Administration, is the largest healthcare system in the country. We have over 320,000 employees that we are responsible for. And that's just in VHA, not the other parts of VA. Most of them are doctors, nurses, and professionals in the 170 medical centers that we run around the country. And the biggest thing that has impacted us over the past year is VA also has a fourth mission besides healthcare benefits and cemeteries. We are the backstop for the U.S. medical system. And that's became very important over the past year, where we were actually bringing civilians into VA hospitals, a lot of different things going on. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But anyway, the employee education system consists of about 6 divisions. broadcast and video, e-learning, events, client services, and the division that I'm part of is the support division. We support the other groups, and within our division, we are totally remote. There's no one in our division that actually works in an office. We include our 2 learning management systems, accreditation, mandatory training, marketing communications, and my team is the measurement and evaluation unit, MEU. So that's pretty much where we're at right now.
Great, thank you all. So I want to start with a little personal take on this. You know, we all went to work one day last March and everything was fine. And by the end of the day, we were told, go home. And it's been over a year now. So let's start with personally, how has it impacted how you work? Anne, let's start with you.
Well, I have to say that it was a huge impact because, you know, having my business in an office that I had got the year before, I felt like my business was scaling. I was looking at employees. I was looking at more of what I was doing and making myself more accessible to the clients who I was serving. And because I started off in a virtual platform, it was kind of different for me to actually have a place that I can actually come to every single day, not to mention my other work that I was doing. And so when we were all told to go home, I think like everyone else, we were, okay, this is going to blow over in a few months. Things are going to go back to normal. And it didn't happen. And I ended up having to give up my office. And I had to actually talk to the people, explain to them the situation. It had been 9 months into the year, and I didn't have one customer for those 9 months. And I didn't see where I needed to go and rush to get a PPP loan or any of that. But it did let me know how fragile businesses were, because I wasn't the only one that was giving up offices. There were people all over the city where I live that one minute they were there and next minute there's paper on the windows. And it was really a very shocking thing, because it just lets us know just how fragile the industry was still, regardless of what status you were in your business. Coming back to my house, however, was sort of comforting, because I knew that I still had a virtual presence, but how different it was going to be was a challenge. So now that it's been a year, it's still a challenge, because there's so much going on and everybody's doing everything virtual. But it's really all about making sure that you have the right foundation from the beginning so that you can kind of still do business, if that makes sense. So it's still a challenge. It is very much so a challenge, and still a little shocking that it's been a year so far.
Yeah, you know, Anne, you mentioned the paper on the windows, and I had to drive into DC one day to go to my office to pick something up. We can go in for a 2-hour period on a particular day, and if it's not your day, don't go near the building. And so I went in, I had to get something out of my office, and driving through DC and seeing how many businesses are empty. It's very sobering, very sobering. Thank you, Anne. Gary, this was a momentary notice. I know that at FEMA, folks telework occasionally, but now it's full time. So how did it impact you personally?
I think well, and you're right. You know, one of the great things is teleworking, which is a normal part of our routine. At least in our office in FIMA, we have a hoteling arrangement, so no one has a permanent desk unless you're at a SCS level. And so having the equipment to telework and the capabilities, fortunately, you know, was already in place. But I think one of the biggest impacts personally was no longer was I kind of aware of the time. I found, and I hear a lot of people say this really, that your day just blends. So I too, FEMA headquarters is in DC, and I took public transportation to get to and from work. And so I was always mindful of, when my bus is going to be at X time, I don't want to miss this bus because then I'm going to have to wait a half an hour for the next one. So I'm always mindful of, I don't care what's going on, laptop gets turned off, gets packed up, and I'm walking out the door because I want to get on this bus. But when you're working remotely, that's no longer there. So, X time would come and I would just find myself, I would just keep going and keep going. I guess one of the benefits too is maybe having a little longer, if your schedule allows it, in the middle of the day, perhaps to run an errand, because you're thinking, well, I could always make up for it, or get up extra early, or thinking that, oh, I no longer have my commute time, my 45 minutes on both ends, so now that's added work time. So I think to just tie it up in a bow, I found myself probably putting in more hours, because before, when I was acutely aware of that commute time to get to and from work, now it just all kind of blends. And of course, I could hear other people say everyone's in the house, kids are at home, schooling, everyone's in the house. And so feeling, that, and then we moved in the middle of all this too. Fortunately, moved to a bigger place. So that couldn't have worked out any better, since it turns out that we were all going to be stuck at home, and trying to respect each other's space and be quiet, and respecting the sign on the door that says, yeah, I'm in a meeting. So you just can't pop in when dad's on Zoom or dad's in a Teams meeting. But you kind of make it work. You kind of figure it out as you go along.
Yeah. So Dave, you've been teleworking now for quite some time. I'm sure, the day they announced was just another day, but talk to me a little bit about what impact that this whole thing has had on you.
Well, as far as my team, you're right. We had been totally remote for about 2 years before the pandemic hit. And you have to understand, I started working for VHA in 2017. And that before that, I was working in DC. So I had the same commute issues that Gary talked about. And so a lot of it was tied to that last train out. If I didn't catch the last train to Brunswick line, then it was going to be a terrible commute home. When I came over to VHA, the requirement was we had to be in the office 2 days out of a pay period. So we weren't totally 100% telework, but for all intents and purposes, we were. We were able to go 100% remote when the medical centers started needing the space that we were using. And Cleveland was one of the first that took over EES space. And so we took it as an opportunity to say, hey, we don't need additional space, just let us go 100% remote. And we got permission to do that. So by the time the pandemic hit, all of the groups in our division were 100% remote. None of the other divisions were. So it had more of an impact on them than it did on us. The biggest issues that we had as far as the pandemic, well, the first thing is we were getting a lot of calls to share best practices in teleworking, because we had done a lot of work on this and we knew it worked. The thing was, we were considered the most productive division in EES consistently. We also had the highest employee survey scores of any group within EES. And of course, people say, well, that's just because you guys sit at home and do nothing. And they learned that's not the case when we started working remotely. The biggest problem we had initially was bandwidth. We learned probably a couple days into everyone working remote that our systems were crashing. And we were warned by IT that we had to reduce our use of bandwidth. So we are a firm believer in cameras. Cameras got turned off. We were doing everything we could to possibly cut down our usage of the network. And it was critical because at the same time we were starting to work remote, we were also switching veterans over from face-to-face visits to telehealth visits. So that was taking up a big chunk of our bandwidth. So we had to compensate for that. That only lasted a couple of weeks. And since then, I believe our undersecretary made a comment that we quadrupled our bandwidth in a period of about a month. And one of my employees, her husband works in IT for VA. She said that they were purchasing servers wherever they could find them. Anything they could get, they were getting to bolster the system, and it worked. And now we have plenty of bandwidth, so that has not been a problem.
Awesome. Yeah. For us at NEA, it was not a common thing to telework. A lot of folks didn't. You can't during your first 6 months. So I had just started teleworking a couple days a week. My boss in particular is no, 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 no telework, no telework. And just this week, she said to me, don't tell anybody. I think I like this teleworking thing. I don't think I want to go back. So it's interesting to see the different perspectives. Let's build off that and tell me how successful you think you are working remotely. So David, you've already said your team's the most productive. What makes it so productive for your team?
Well, part of it is we don't have to worry about the commute times. We don't have to worry about those other things. A lot of people say it's the distractions at work. Someone stopping by your cube and just shooting the breeze. So there are a lot of things, and it was interesting because when this all came up, and a lot of the divisions were curious about how this was going to work. Frankly, when this hit, and I will say VHA was way ahead of the curve on this because we knew it was coming. And I actually was looking at some old notes from a meeting back in like January of last year where people didn't even know what COVID-19 was. And in that, I made the comment, they're telling us this COVID-19 thing's going to be a really big deal. And I think that's probably the understatement of my career because obviously it came to be, but VHA was ahead. They knew this was coming because they track these things. And so they were giving us warnings that, hey, we're going to have to do some, exceptional things. So we were working to support VHA throughout this. And just to give you an idea, VHA doubled the number of ICU beds in our facilities during this period. We had to reskill people. Those nurses who were working in offices were now going out onto the floors. Those nurses on the floors were now going into ICU. And so and the ICU folks had to be trained on this new virus. They had to learn how to do some of the work they did in ICU while wearing the protective clothing and respirators. And so it's a whole different environment. And we talk about how effective we were. I think EES was exceptional as far as putting this together. And I honestly feel it wouldn't have worked if we would have been working in an office. We had to put so many new courses online, developed from scratch. And it was literally a race against time because we knew it was coming. Our people were begging for information, for training, and we were working at as fast as we possibly could. We had nightly meetings that we went over what was coming up, what we had, and while we were in those meetings, I kept thinking, if I was still working in DC, that last train would have left about 20 minutes ago. And so it really, kind of pointed that out. The work I felt was extraordinary. The stuff that we were able to develop probably won't win any awards, but it definitely saved lives. And that was the key. We were out there to save lives. And one of the point, one of the aha moments was that we were on one of these calls one night, and we had a program that was downloading a new e-learning program that the field was desperate for. And one of our LMS managers, the e-learning group was passing it off to LMS. And one of the LMS managers, they said it'll be about an hour till we, finish downloading this. And her comment was, that's perfect. It'll give me time to put my kids to bed, and then we can work on this the rest of the night. So that's the kind of thing you wouldn't have been able to do if we would have been confined to an office. And it's something that our leadership started recognizing very early on. The comment that we heard the most from our leaders was they didn't realize how hard you worked when you were teleworking. The fact is, Gary mentioned, the clock becomes an issue because people are working later and later, and they actually were putting out messages, hey, pace yourselves, don't burn out. True, at the beginning, we had to give it everything we had in order to get these courses out there. But our leadership was recognizing that people were definitely burning the candle at both ends. And so that, I think, really woke them up that we could be effective, not just effective, but extraordinary while we're working from home.
Yeah, absolutely. You raise a great, I gotta tell you, my takeaway from all this is it may not win any awards, but we're saving lives. And if that doesn't talk about a mission statement worth fighting for. Thank you. So Gary, I know that you have been working remotely off and on. How successful do you think you are working remotely?
Phenomenal, really. I think that I personally have remained very focused, still get a lot done, keep my eye on the prize, stay focused on the mission, understand that, my projects have to work forward. I too am really proud of my teams, with our programs, how quickly we pivoted. We expected our Moonshot Academy initiative to have been in person. And so, it did take a couple of months to repurpose and repackage and redesign all the materials for virtual delivery. But fortunately, online learning, virtual classroom isn't a new thing. So it isn't like we had to sit and think to ourselves like, I wonder what we're going to do next. It's like, oh, we just know where we needed to pivot to. And fortunately, everyone just jumped to it and pivoted. The mentoring program, we thought, again, was going to be in person, that mentors and mentees would be spending physical time together, having conversations, doing developmental activities. But, fortunately, FEMA and probably all of DHS has MS Teams, which has been flawless. So kudos, whoever the developers are at Microsoft. Teams has been flawless. And so those connects were all done virtually. Would we like to be together in person? And particularly at this point, yeah. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that we wouldn't. But in terms of the productivity and the way that I feel that I personally and my teams just quickly pivoted to make sure that we still delivered high quality programs and were successful. And in talking to the end users, so when talking to both the mentors and the mentees, for example, one of the things they say is they miss having those serendipitous conversations, those bumping into each other in the water cooler to say, or in the break room and say, hey, Cheryl, how's it going with that project you were telling me about? Of course, with virtual, everything needs to be planned. You just don't bump into somebody on Zoom. It just does not happen. And if I did bump into one of my team members in my kitchen at home, I think I would probably scream, like, how did you get in here? So that's kind of missed. And I think that builds some of the success because it builds some of the interpersonal and the comradeship amongst team members that's above and beyond getting the work done. So it's interesting, when this whole thing first started, we had intentional team connects just to hop on teams, just to shoot the sugar honey iced tea, just to chat and talk about what's going on, to try and have some of those kind of personal yuck moments that we would normally have in the office. I think none of us had a crystal ball and figured that this would last a year plus. So over the months, those started to kind of trail off. But every once in a while, we'll have a virtual happy hour, just so people can feel a warm fuzzy. We've hired several people during COVID. My heart goes out to them to be hired into a remote situation, whereas the rest of us had the benefit of working in the building of everyone for years and years and years, and then we went home. So like for new hires, what we did is we told everyone on the team, like, hey, just schedule 30 minutes with Jane Doe, and just no agenda, just have a conversation, meet each other, chat, see what you have in common, talk about your hobbies, make Jane feel welcome, make Joe feel welcome. And so that's been kind of neat to do that. And so the new folk have really appreciated it. And I think we're all anxious to get back in the office to meet this ton of new people that have joined the team, that we've only seen in 2 dimensions on a computer screen.
Yeah, great point. I don't know how new folks are doing it. And you, for a long time, worked from home. You had a great office at home. Then I was so proud of you and loved that you had your big opening. You were doing some amazing classes. How successful are you getting back into the working remotely?
Well, I wish I could say I was as successful as Gary and Dave, but on my end is literally a 360-degree turn. I would say from my perspective, being a small business owner and just being me for the most part was very challenging, because there were months where I was like, okay, I have no clients, I have no classes. What am I going to do? And then the first thing that kind of clicked in was, I'm going to have to reconnect back doing virtual training again via phone. And what does that look like? But the challenges was that everybody was scared. Everybody was scared of COVID. It was information overload. There were webinars flying everywhere. I literally had to wait 3 or 4 months for people to calm down before I can actually go out there. Nobody was interested in starting a business. And matter of fact, some of the businesses was trying to figure out if they were going to still be in business, or whether people felt like they were scared to start or even inquire about it, because it was just so much uncertainty out there. And even with businesses, like really big box businesses that's been out there for years, they were also nervous. So it was very hard for me to figure out in the beginning, how was I going to reconnect with my target market or my target audience? And just so happened that, speaking to what Gary was saying, hey, what do we do next, right? So the Montgomery County Housing Opportunity Commission, who I have worked with before to provide small business training to residents in Montgomery County, reached out with that very same thing. Hey, we need to continue our learning programs for those that are on our sustainability program. And they reached out to me and said, we would like to do a virtual class. You already done 2 classes that had a hybrid of in-person and virtual. We want you to do a virtual class, which we did, and it was successful. That we literally just finished graduating 6 students out of. We started off with 10, but 2 of our students unfortunately got coronavirus and had to drop out the class, and it was very sad. But they're going to come back in the next cohort, so they were so happy about this class that we're actually going to do another class coming up in July, and so I'm so excited about that. And by having that opportunity, it actually just reinvigorated me so much that I started coming back with the roundtables again. and thinking about doing some other things that I kind of left off in 2019 and 2020. And I'm also bringing back the Veterans Conference, as you know. So I am just really excited about that, that opportunity. But it had to start, I think for me, it had to start with other people feeling comfortable to do business, you know, to really feel like that they can make it work regardless. And I think from a small business perspective, a lot of these businesses did not realize that not having a virtual component, not understanding what it means to reach out virtually and to keep that going as a backup plan. I think a lot of business owners kind of took that for granted that, no, I don't need an app. No, I don't need a website that has a virtual component. No, I don't think I need Zoom or any of that. And I think now they're realizing just how important this is. I have seen businesses quickly, just like Dave was talking about and Gary was talking about, how they are quickly putting things online, that they are investing in new apps that are coming out. I think like 10 apps have actually come out that actually incentivize people to be on virtually to communicate. You have the Clubhouse app right now that's very popular on, I think it's the iPad, iOS platform, and people are like begging for it to be on Samsung so that they can actually have Android devices to do this analog thing. And Zoom has literally like blown up. If you kind of go out to their website now and look at their pricing structure, it is expensive now to try to do a Zoom or even a webinar with Zoom these days, because of the popularity and the use of bandwidth. I think everybody has now got a new perspective that this is something different that's going to be the new norm going forward. I don't think anyone is going to go back to not having a virtual aspect to their business on any type of level. It's definitely going to be challenging, because one of the biggest challenges is that although you are virtual, the challenge of meeting your target audience is probably 60% greater of not really meeting them, because there's so many people online and it's very difficult to pinpoint an actual person because everybody is online. You never know who's on there, just scrolling by and looking by. So it makes it challenging for somebody like myself or someone in the next level to kind of make a sale or to convert a sale, because you don't know who's actually looking at your product or your service. But learning how to take classes like what I'm offering and some of the other people are offering, to learn how to rescale and readjust your marketing tactic or your sales tactic will help convert those prospects into sales so that you can stay sustainable. And that's really where I would say the biggest challenge is.
Yeah, thank you. I want to remind everybody that's watching this, our panelists are live in the chat. So feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'm going to keep managing the chat and asking some probing questions there. But I want to talk about the new normal. Gary, you know that new normal is something we talk about at FEMA all the time. So the country is poised to begin fully reopening, hopefully at some point this year. What does the new normal look like for you?
Probably, a continuation. In practical terms, just, probably teleworking more often than I did pre-COVID. I think it's going to be the new normal, and just being more mindful of cleanliness and hygiene. I think all of us are always going to continue to use our hand sanitizers, to wash our hands more often, just to be more cognizant of what we touch and how close we are to other people and being in crowds. I think that's just going to be the new normal, because something's going to come after COVID. I mean, I don't think this is going to be the last pandemic in the history of mankind. So I think all of us are going to be much more careful about what we are expose our bodies to.
Mm-hmm.
I know I will.
Yep. Anne, what about you? What does the new normal look like for Alston Tech?
Well, I will say that I realize that I'm probably going to need to get a bigger office just so I can accommodate the 6 feet for in-person classes. I do see myself having in-person classes and also virtual classes, and maybe hiring some other instructors to do virtual classes on certain subjects. I do believe that this is not over. I'm like Gary, I'm pretty sure that this is something that's going to be a recurring thing. And with everybody mindfulness on it, we still have to be careful, because even with vaccination, anything could change. The whole dynamic could change. And I don't think not having a virtual component is going to be possible. So we have to make sure that we have a backup to our backup and find different ways to be virtual so that we can stay in touch with our customers, to make sure that they know that we're still present, that we're still here, and not be the business with the paper on the wall, and because now you wonder if you're even going to be able to come back. And so a lot of businesses are struggling with that. And it's very costly to not be able to shift and adjust and have some sort of virtual component. So I'm sort of blessed in a way to have started off that way. But if I hadn't started off that way, I'll be like some of these people that's twiddling our thumbs, like, what do we do? How do we make this work? And feel like you're starting over from scratch. So I think having a bigger office would be very nice. Having some alternative places where people can come in and get that one-on-one, face-to-face feel that we all miss, right? And then also having that virtual class so that people can feel like that they can do this from home.
Yeah. Dave,
Mhm.
what does new normal look like for Dave?
Well, the thing we've already seen is that the real estate footprint's changing. We were notified last week that, for those of you who don't know, VA's headquarters is at 810 Vermont. They're in DC. And then across the street, we have space. Across I Street, we have space. We've been told that we are giving up our space on I Street. And the only people who will be there will be our new CLO and an assistant. The deputy CLO is switching to 100% telework. And that is a huge change. Now we're going to have our leadership in that role. I see some of it, the other divisions going to more availability of telework, although not all of the divisions can do that. Our broadcast and video in particular, some of their people have to be in the studio behind the cameras and on the control boards, et cetera. So that you'll see some become permanent telework, but some will still have to stay in as they are now. The other thing we've seen is a transition on some of our learning from the longer courses that take a long time to develop to rapid development. One of the things that became very popular was a program that we put together with the help of the head of emergency departments for VHA called COVID in 20. These are 20-minute video episodes, as they call them, and they're offered twice a week, and they are put together very quickly. The topics they're discussing are the topics that are pertinent that particular week. And what we see happening is they're already talking about a transition from COVID in 20 to healthcare in 20, so that people will be able to get these short bursts of information and knowledge. And I think that will continue to be popular in the going forward.
Absolutely. So I want to, again, folks that are watching this, you are welcome to participate in the chat. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to take a couple of minutes and share their best practices with us. But please keep in mind that we will still be in the chat. We will still be engaged. So Anne, what do you have to share with everybody? What have you found to be your best practices for being successful?
Okay, so I would say the number one thing is to just be realistic about your capabilities. Not understanding what you need to understand, you need to go directly to training immediately. I think one of the things why I do this type of work is because once you start a business, it does not mean that you stop learning, that you stop learning how to make things better for your business, whether you think a little bit of information is not going to help you, it actually can help you a lot. It all depends on when it comes in. So knowing your capabilities and what you know and what you don't know is the very first thing that I would say that any small business owner should consider. I know that I've used it, and once I realize what I can and cannot do, I literally go out there, and that's the number two thing, is get the education needed so that you could be proactive, that you can go out there and confidently work with people remotely and be able to conduct business as if you were conducting business in person. That's another thing. I would also say invest in some proper equipment. Make sure you invest in proper camera equipment, audio equipment. As you see in my background, this is not my background, but you want to make sure you invest in the proper equipment that's going to make you look professional. Also, I would say that if you are doing training or you're providing some sort of service that you have to sell, also invest in making sure you can speak well, making sure that you can communicate and be able to articulate what it is that you are providing to the customer so that they feel comfortable with whatever it is that you're trying to sell. And then understanding what your resources are, making sure that you have the right resource for your marketing, your sales, or your time. Make sure you definitely have time management, which is also part of a huge resource, because I always tell people that you cannot control time, but you can control what you do with your time. And having really good time management is going to help you be successful in any environment, whether you're in person or virtual. Those are the key ones that I use all the time. It helps me multitask, it helps me stay focused, and it helps me be able to execute what it is that I'm trying to execute. And I would say the last one is proper goal planning, just making sure that you have your goals laid out in your plan so that you can understand what it is that you need to do and how you need to achieve it before you execute your services. And those are the ones that made me successful in my business since '97.
Great, thank you. Gary, best practices.
Hey, real short and sweet. Hey, I work for FEMA, so of course I'm going to say remain flexible. Just remain flexible, and obviously stay grounded in your core values. So whether there's your organization's core values, as far as being compassionate, and just your personal core values of having mercy, having grace. So that's it. Thank you so much.
David, core values, best practices.
Well, we tell people who ask how we do it as far as teleworking, we tell them that we adhere to the 3 C's. Culture, clock, and camera. Culture, not all jobs are telework suitable, and not all people are telework suitable. So we're very careful about who we hire, and we make sure that they understand the expectations. We also try to build a culture. We do a lot of things that are team building exercises and just things to get to know people. We have one group did their own version of cribs, where people took photos around their house and around their hometown. And so this is how they live. And we actually get a great insight into what's important to people. The second one is clock. And Gary mentioned this a couple of times. We've got to be aware of our time. We've got to make sure that we're not working too much over. A little bit over is fine. I don't complain about it. But when I see my people on late, of course, then they're asking, why are you on so late? And I said, well, no, that's me. But make sure you adhere to the clock. Recognize that it's important to take breaks. It's important that you, don't burn yourself out. And as I said, our leadership who suddenly started teleworking were shocked at how they had the tendency to work later and later and later. And so they started cautioning all of our people about that. So we adhere to that. The final thing is cameras. Our meetings are all on camera. A lot of people don't like that, but that's something that our division director mandated. And it's interesting to see what happens on the calls where you do have a camera. A lot of times other people on the call say, gee whiz, maybe I'll turn my camera on. And so it's much more personal. You're able to capture nonverbal communication, see what's going on when you're actually kind of looking in someone's eyes. I had an example. My oldest son came down with COVID. He was still working from home, and he was on a call, and his boss saw him and said, "You look terrible. You need to go to bed." And which he did, but if it would have been a case where they hadn't been using the camera, they never would have picked up on that. The other thing is that camera use discourages multitasking, which a lot of people say, "Hey, yeah, I'm great at multitasking." No, you're still gonna be doing one task over another. And on meetings, when you have that camera on and everyone sees you, if you're doing something else, then they're going to see that you're not really engaged in the discussion. And I'll admit I cheat sometimes and try to get some things done, but it seems like every time I do that, all of a sudden somebody says, "Dave, what do you think about that?" And now I'm like, okay, what did they just say? And I realized that I was not engaged in that meeting at that time as I should have been. So I've learned my lesson. I stay engaged. When I worked at Limited Brands, we had part of our culture was be here now. When you're in a meeting, you're in that meeting, and you're not supposed to be on your phone doing things, or you're not supposed to be doing other work. So that's very important. The final thing I'll add is that the thing that I found in this, obviously, not an advertisement for someone's services, but one of the things that I did early becoming a remote manager was I took a online class or an online session on TrainingNet, and the presenter was Cynthia Clay, and she is absolutely incredible. Her sessions are recorded on training.net that you can go see, and a lot of the practices that she advocates, we incorporated. We actually had all of our managers watch one of her sessions to learn how to do it right. So those are just some of the things that we throw out there.
Great. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. As a reminder to folks watching, we are still here. We're still live in the chat. So please connect with our speakers. Ian, Gary, David, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I just want to point out Gary is actually on vacation while we're recording this. So thank your wife and kids for giving us an hour of your time. That's it for now. I'm Cheryl Seminara. Thank you so much for joining us. And make sure you stay tuned throughout the entire rest of the conference. We've got some more great sessions coming up. Thank you.